The life of Sarah Johnson was never simple from the start. As a baby, she was discovered crying in a cardboard box at the entrance of an orphanage in the city of Old Town, USA. Being only a few months old, her adoption happened swiftly. Several families showed interest in the infant, and a couple was chosen to care for the newborn. Subscribe to the channel and click on the notification. Help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. This way YouTube will deliver this content to more people who will benefit. I count on your help. However, what seemed like a rescue in Sarah's life turned into a nightmare for years. The couple had no aptitude for raising children, and adoption was motivated by self-interest. They aimed to receive a government incentive that helped adoptive parents cover the costs of raising an orphan. With her adoptive parents focused solely on the money, Sarah was neglected throughout her childhood. Her room was dark, windowless, and her meals consisted of leftovers. She attended a local kindergarten but had no friends and was often shunned, as she was the only adopted child and always wore shabby clothes and worn-out shoes. Over time, Sarah learned she had to fend for herself if she ever wanted a decent life. She reinforced her studies at home with books from school and prepared her meals using vegetables she grew in a makeshift garden near her house. Despite all these hardships, Sarah was a cheerful and respectful child. She viewed the world as a wonderful place she longed to explore. All she had to do was wait for the right moment. That moment came painfully when she turned 18. The adoption incentive law provided resources until the children reach adulthood. So once the last check arrived, the Johnsons kicked Sarah out. "You're a grown woman now, Sarah. It's time for you to take care of yourself," said her adoptive mother, Linda, on her birthday. "Be grateful we gave you a roof all this time, but now another orphan needs a home," added Tom, opening the door. Thus, Sarah found herself alone in the world at 18. With help from the orphanage staff where she was left years ago, she secured a small apartment in a city-funded complex. It wasn't the safest place, but Sarah had no other option. With humility, she accepted her fate and focused on finding a job. However, the task proved more challenging than the inexperienced young woman had imagined. Sarah visited numerous restaurants, stores, and factories, only to face rejection after rejection. When hope seemed lost, an opportunity arose with Jack Miller, the manager of a small grocery chain store, who saw her knocking door to door. "Yes, I'm seeking work. I can clean floors, organize your stock, and do anything you teach me," Sarah said during her interview with Jack. Anything?" asked the manager slyly, and Sarah just nodded. He looked her over and said, "Great. A young woman like you will be perfect for boosting the store's sales," he remarked with a slight smile. Slightly uncomfortable, Sarah replied, "Thank you, sir. I'll do my best." Jack Miller was nearing his 50s and had a history of failed businesses. Managing the grocery store was his last chance to hold a job and pay his bills. He was known in town for never missing an opportunity to make advances on women, boasting about breaking hearts nationwide. Upon seeing Sarah, he decided to hire her but continued the interview to gauge her financial desperation, knowing that the more desperate she was for money, the easier it would be to control her. On the other hand, Sarah, unaware of his intentions, was thrilled to land the job, which seemed like a good start for her professional life. The store already had another employee named Mary, who had been there for 8 months. Mary liked Sarah at first and taught her everything about running the store and dealing with customers. Sarah quickly adapted to the work routine and began to notice some discrepancies in certain invoices made by Mary, but she decided to stay silent as a newcomer. After a few months, Mary finally confessed her scheme for making extra money through sales and even suggested Sarah join her, whispering, "Look, customers never notice. Just add a few dollars to the bill. If they catch it, apologize and say it was a mistake. If they don't notice and overpay, you pocket the difference. I'm sure a few extra dollars would help you," Mary said, but Sarah looked away and changed the subject, declining the offer. Despite growing up in an oppressive home, Sarah knew stealing and deceiving customers was wrong. She always lived humbly but honestly, and her salary was sufficient for the modest life she was accustomed to. However, Mary's fraudulent schemes weren't the only issue in the store. Unbeknownst to her, Sarah was constantly watched by the store manager, who had shown interest in her since her hiring. To Jack, it was only a matter of time before he got what he wanted. He used any excuse to be near Sarah, touching her hand, hugging her waist, and making dubious remarks. "Excuse me, Mr. Miller, but I don't appreciate this kind of joke," Sarah said after escaping another inappropriate advance from the store owner. But that day, Jack was bolder than ever. "You can try to avoid me all you want, but in the end, I'll get what I want. Do you know why you got this job? It certainly wasn't for your resume. Jack said, smoothing his greasy hair. Mary overheard the entire conversation and laughed at the situation. She knew well what Jack meant. When it happened to her, she allowed him to get what he wanted, knowing she could exploit the situation for her benefit, as she had been doing with her payment scheme. Tears threatened to fall from Sarah's eyes, and it took enormous effort for her to pull herself together and continue working until the end of the day. After her shift, Sarah took off her uniform and ran home, where she finally let her emotions take over. Sarah entered the shower, hoping to wash away not just her body but also her soul. She didn't understand why she deserved so many hardships since she was a baby. If she had been born to a different woman, would her fate have been different? None of it mattered. She asked for salvation, but what she received was the opposite. Months passed, with Jack becoming increasingly bold and disturbing. But then something changed at the grocery store. The store's profits had decreased in recent months, drawing the attention of the chain's owner, who monitored everything from afar. One day, while Sarah was organizing newly arrived goods in the stockroom, she accidentally overheard a private conversation in Jack's office between him and Mary. The manager seemed worried. Things aren't going well. I don't know how much longer I can hold on to my position here. The head office has tried to schedule a meeting several times, but my excuses are running out, so I better start thinking of a way out. Mary then fired back. This might have to do with what Sarah's been doing. I found out she has a scheme to inflate customer bills and make extra money on the side. Jack looked at Mary in disbelief. This is absurd. I was the only one who gave this girl a chance, and she repays me by stabbing me in the back, stealing from me. Call her here. I'll resolve this now. However, Mary managed to calm Jack's fury by suggesting he wait for the right moment to blame Sarah for the store's declining revenue. Jack thought for a few seconds and agreed, claiming he would keep an eye on Sarah's actions from subscribe to the channel and click on the notification. Help this channel reach 1,000 subscribers. This way YouTube will deliver this content to more people who will benefit. I count on your help. Now on, Sarah was stunned by what she heard. She considered going to the police, but without evidence, who would they believe? The store manager and a longtime employee, or a newly hired orphan? Throughout the rest of the day, Sarah struggled to hide her worried expression from Mary, who didn't care about her fate. During lunch, Sarah decided to maintain her routine and somehow find evidence of Jack and Mary's plans. But what Sarah didn't know was that her life was about to change drastically. The next day, an old pickup truck stopped in front of the grocery store. An elderly man got out, wearing a tattered jumpsuit and a worn-out cap. "Good morning, young lady," the polite gentleman said, handing Sarah a shopping list. "Is this J&M? I never know which store I need to go to. Anyway, would you have these products in your store?" After gathering everything the elderly man requested, Sarah went to the register to receive payment. The elderly man searched all his pockets and said, completely embarrassed, "I'm sorry, dear. I think I forgot my wallet at home. I know this is unusual for you, and I really hate to ask, but my son hasn't visited me in 2 years. My wife and I want to welcome him properly, so we're preparing his favorite meal. But we're short on time, and I still have to pick him up at the airport in a few hours. I don't want you to think this is a scam. If I left you a document as collateral, would you let me return later to pay my debt?" He can come back with me and explain the situation. It was clear the elderly man was uncomfortable and embarrassed as he made this request to Sarah. Before Sarah could respond, Mary, standing next to her, said, "It's amazing how you poor folks come up with 1,000 excuses not to pay for anything. Nothing here is free, you know. So if you don't have money, you can't take anything. We're not a charity. Now leave before I call the police." The elderly man was speechless for a few seconds, trying to understand how a polite request resulted in such a disrespectful response. "Look, miss, I didn't say I don't have money. I just forgot my wallet at home. I didn't want to say this, but if I'm not mistaken, this is one of my son's stores. Anyway, I'll pay for the products and can leave my documents as collateral," said the elderly man. Mary looked him up and down and let out a mocking laugh. "Your son owns the J&M chain?" "Sure, and my uncle is Scrooge McDuck. I'll call the manager now, and he'll tell you what to do with that document." Mary turned and walked toward Jack's office. Seeing the sadness on the elderly man's face, Sarah handed him the shopping bag and said, "Here you go. You can take it. A family lunch must be something valuable. You can return later to pay the bill. Thank you so much, my dear. You don't know how happy this makes me. All I want is to welcome my son in the best way possible." "God bless you," said the elderly man, smiling. As soon as the elderly man left the store, Mary returned with Jack. When questioned by him, Sarah replied that she let the man leave with the groceries but assured him not to worry. If he didn't show up by the end of the day, Jack could deduct the purchase amount from her salary. At that moment, Jack exploded in anger, shouting, "Now I understand why this place is going bankrupt. I have an employee who gives away food to every beggar that shows up here. Now listen carefully, Missy. If that old man doesn't come back by the end of the day, you have two options. Come to my house tonight, or you'll be out on the street with nothing." Jack knew the elderly man's purchase was of little value, but it gave him the perfect excuse to force her to sleep with him or fire her without paying any rights. All he had to do was wait until the end of the day, as he was sure the elderly man wouldn't return. In his mind, his plan to blame the grocery store's failure on Sarah was more certain than ever. He just didn't expect his world of lies and abuse to crumble. Hours later, when Sarah had lost hope, a BMW parked in front of the grocery store, and an elegant man stepped out, wearing designer clothes and sunglasses. He walked around the car and opened the passenger door, helping the same elderly man from earlier out of the car. The two approached the store and headed towards Sarah. "Hello again, young lady," said the elderly man. "As promised, I came to settle my debt. Unfortunately, I couldn't help but hear what your rude manager said to you right after I left. This is Jonathan, my son, and he wants to have a word with your boss." Jonathan was the elderly man's only son, who had left the city years ago to study. Fortunately, he was a smart man who made a lot of money in the retail market. Jonathan owned several profitable businesses, and the J&M grocery chain was just one of them. When Jack came out of his office and saw the elderly man who had visited earlier, his body froze. He knew that was indeed Jonathan's father, the owner of the chain, but his nightmare worsened when he realized Jonathan himself was there. "Hello, Jack. My father told me everything that happened here, and I must say you were extremely unfortunate in your remarks," Jonathan said, addressing Jack. "One should never treat a good deed this way, as we never know how fate might react. It's one thing not to want to help an elderly man. It's another to abuse an employee of my company, claiming she should sleep at your house to keep her job. My father heard everything, and you went too far, my dear. I would never have the success I have today if I treated my employees that way. I owe everything I have to them." At that moment, Sarah couldn't hold back her tears. The elderly man approached and comforted her. Jonathan continued, "I didn't just come here to visit my parents, although that's the best part of the trip. I'm here to understand why this store is the only one in the entire chain that's losing money. But it seems I've figured it out. Mr. Miller, let's talk privately in your office right now." Cornered, Jack showed all the reports and documents to his boss, Jonathan. Analyzing the papers, Jonathan confirmed what he had suspected. Jack had been embezzling money and goods from the grocery store for months. Jonathan also spent hours talking to Sarah, who told him everything she heard during the previous day's conversation, as well as all the abuse she had suffered from that vile man. Given everything, there was no choice but to fire and call the police to have Jack charged. Mary was fired, and Jack was sentenced to 3 years in prison for tax fraud and theft. Additionally, several women sued him for harassment, which was still in court and could land him up to 15 years in prison. Sarah was hired as the new manager of the store, and a strong friendship developed between her and the elderly man, who did everything to try to match her with his son. Sarah always says it's not the time to think about it, but she couldn't help but notice Jonathan's affectionate smiles and his increasingly frequent visits to the store. If you enjoyed the story, please leave a like, and this other video appearing on the screen now will likely move you as well. Enjoy the session and see you in the next video.